Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Boy, have I had a weird week as far as my podcasts go. Arturo had set the whole thing up back in 2015 when I did my first cast. Things have gone relatively well for the last few years. A glitch here, a gremlin there, but overall I didn't have to change anything major. A Tuesday, I was going to record a guest at 8 a.m. So at 7, I went through everything, hoping there'd be few bugs to chase away. Well, I was surprised that my Nicecast had stopped working. The app would open, but it was dead. I was trying to restart the computer. I tried refreshing the app. I tried everything, but still unable to record by 7:50. I quickly opened my email to let the guest know there were big problems, only to find that my guest had had to back out, had a sore throat, so we rescheduled. Then I started looking for a new app for recording. It had to be able to record from my Skype line. It had to record from the soundboard, and I had to be able to record off of my mixer all at once, without too much editing involved. Well, I looked for a new app, something that was both reasonably priced, but would also do all the things I wanted it to do. I found one that looked okay. Not too expensive. I downloaded the free trial and I gave it a test run. All went well. It recorded everything that I had to do. The Skype, the soundboard, everything seemed to be working very well. I sent them the $50 to buy the thing, and then I tried recording a test run. Well, when I recorded my voice, it sounded like I was a machine, and the voice was real slow. Ridiculously slow. It sounded like I was starring in a horror movie. So I went through every button, every switch, everything I could find, trying to adjust the speed of the recording, which is really weird because the music at the beginning of the program came out super fast, which was, I don't know, something strange going on. Well, I tried to get it to fix, and then I watched all the YouTube self-help videos that the company offered, and after working on this thing until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I finally said, I'm going to have to just not use that program and hopefully get my money back. So I sent them a letter, and they said, okay, we'll send you your money back. Too bad. Anyway, then I started looking for something to record the show with again. Well, as I'm looking at different apps on the computer, I found somebody that said they used GarageBand to record their podcast with. Well, I already had GarageBand on my computer. I used it to mix the music and the audio together whenever I had a guest on the show that I didn't want to interrupt them playing commercials and the music and all. So, this show is being recorded on GarageBand, and I hope it sounds good. I won't know until I play it over the air and see if it sounds as good as I'm hoping it will. If this works out, I'll be using GarageBand for the next few months, years. If it doesn't work, I'll be back on the computer looking for a new app to record the show on. If I was making money doing strange things, I'd put a lot more money into doing a good show, but since this is nothing but a money hole as far as my economy goes, I have to be careful how much money I spend. If you have a scary story from the Laredo area, you or somebody you know saw a ghost or some weird creature that you can't explain, or you saw a UFO and you're willing to share, send me your stories. I'm writing a new book called Paranormal Laredo. Send me your sightings at strangethings@arkanasa.com. Back when I was young, I was a firefighter. I had started out working in construction, but I discovered that putting them out was a lot funner than putting them up. I managed to survive 8 years running into burning buildings. Oh yeah, I got hurt a few times. Woke up in the hospital way too many times. That was the first time I really threw my back out. Oh, I mean bad. I was out of work for 9 months. I would still probably be bent over in pain if it hadn't have been for a weird friend of mine. He was studying to be a chiropractor. He came by the apartment one day and he said he wasn't going to do anything. He just wanted to look at my body because he had to practice his skills. So I laid on my front and I laid on my back and I laid on my left side and I laid on my right side. And he did all of the things that chiropractors do without ever actually doing anything. And then he said, put your right knee up by your chest. And I brought my knee up, and all of a sudden he pushed down right on my knee, and my back went kapow. And for about a second there, I would have sworn he had broken my back and I was going to be paralyzed the rest of my life. Had I been able to get up off the floor, and had he not been such a large, athletic rugby player kind of guy, I probably would have yelled at him. But then, when I got to my feet, I discovered that my back didn't hurt nearly as bad as it had. The next thing I know, I'm going to a chiropractor on a regular basis, and I was back to work in a matter of weeks. Well, it's been fixed, but it still pops out from time to time. Being a firefighter was fun, but I was losing my sense of self-preservation. I was taking more risks than was good for my health. I loved the action and the excitement, and I wasn't really taking good care of myself. Well, one day, my brother, who worked for the Bureau of Prisons, sent me a note saying that the Border Patrol was hiring, and it was a lot safer than what I was doing. There had been a hiring freeze for a few years, and the patrol was running out of manpower. Folks were retiring or changing careers, and they were not being replaced. 1988, the government decided they had to do something, and they asked for applications. So I went to the post office, and I got an application that you had to fill out in order to get an application to apply for a government position. Not too redundant, an application for an application. Well, I received the Border Patrol application in the mail after about a month. It had to be typed, front and back. I think it was 3 or 4 pages. Well, my typing skills were lacking, so I had to use most of a bottle of whiteout. Anybody remember that stuff? Correcting fluid. Well, a divorced woman with a small child to support named Betty had taken several odd jobs. Eventually, she learned shorthand and how to type. She managed to find employment in 1951 as an executive secretary for the Texas Bank and Trust in Dallas. Typing back then was nothing like today. No computers, no automatic gadgets. If you made a mistake, you were forced to start all over. Well, Betty wanted to find a better way of doing things. One day she was looking at her nail polish and she thought it would be great if she could just dab a bit of color on a typing mistake. As she fiddled around, trying to find different kinds of liquids until she came up with one that she could put on paper, and it almost looked like the mistake was gone. As she showed her invention to other people, and eventually they began marketing liquid paper in 1956. Betty Nesmith Graham became a millionaire practically overnight. Her son Michael went on to become a music star. You might have heard of him. Michael Nesmith of the Monkees? Well, it's true they lip-synced most of their songs, but, well, that was then and this is now. Michael was the guy with the little beanie cap. He wore it all the time. Well, if it hadn't been for Michael Nesmith's mom, I probably wouldn't have been hired by the Border Patrol because my application was covered with whiteout. And if she hadn't invented it, I don't know what I'd have done. So I guess I owe Michael Nesmith's mother a big thank you. Well, once I'd typed the thing up and corrected it a few hundred times and sent it off in the mail, I had to sit back and wait. Somebody up in Washington had to get my application, and they had to look at it, and they had to decide whether or not I was worthy of the job. At long last, I was given notification to report for an oral board. You had to go in, and you had to talk to a bunch of agents. You had to answer questions to things that I didn't know what the heck I was talking about. If you and your partner were in this situation and something happened, what would you do? Well, I would guess, hoping I had the right answer, and apparently either I had the right answer or they were desperate for manpower because they finally decided to hire me. Long last, I was notified to report for duty to Laredo, Texas. I had to look it up on the map. Yeah, I've heard of Laredo. I just didn't know where in Texas it was because Texas is a big place. I was told not to drive because there would be no place to leave my truck while I was away at the academy. So I had to take the bus. Houston to San Antonio. The bus ride was okay, but man, it was crowded with tourists. There were people from Germany and Holland, and maybe a few from Norway and Sweden or Switzerland. They all yelled back and forth from the front to the back of the bus and from the back to the front of the bus. I don't know if that's how they do things in Europe, but that's how they were doing things on that bus. Finally, in San Antonio, I was told to take a different bus. This one was heading south. The first bus had been nice and new. It was well maintained and clean. The bus south was old and it needed a lot of help. Either the black tank was full or it was leaking. There was trash on the floor and the seats were in need of repair. I finally got to Laredo in the late afternoon and looked around, and I thought I just might like it there. The hotel was down the street, and so I walked. They put me in a room with Willie Garcia. He would later become known as the Judge. He was also known as the Count because he looked a lot like the Count from Sesame Street. A 1 and a 2, that guy. We had to pay for our hotel room, and we had to buy our own dinner. This wasn't a big problem until we found out that the government paid for room and board for all the people who joined right after our class. 3 weeks at $25 a day. That's $525, plus meals. Well, they just told us if we wanted our job, we had to suck it up, so we did. Things only got more interesting from there. For 3 weeks, we ran around trying to learn Spanish and do some PT. It's a bad idea to run on dirt trails in formation. We had a few folks got hurt. Things like sprains and twists. Bad injuries if you're trying to pass a PT test in 6 months. There was a guy named Prather. He twisted his knee, and it never healed properly, and he wound up washing out at the academy. After 3 months of abuse, 3 weeks of abuse, we were sent off to the academy. We boarded a deportation bus. It had hard plastic seats, and we had to ride 150 miles up to San Antonio. It smelled real fragrant, too, even with all the windows open. From San Antonio, we were flown, not to Glencoe, Georgia, where all the Border Patrol agents were always trained. No, we got flown to Anniston, Alabama. We were going to go to Fort McClellan. This was where the Army trained military, police, and the chemical guys. When we got off the bus, a guy came and tried yelling at us like we were in the Army. He needed some help. After having listened to Sergeant Cobb yell at me, this guy was unimpressive. We were housed in military barracks. Good Lord, for a while there, I was thinking I was back in basic. Only the barracks at Fort Knox were a lot nicer. They put 12 of us in each room. At Glencoe, they have 2-man rooms. Normally, Border Patrol recruits wear Border Patrol uniforms. Just no badges. Badges? We don't need no stinking badges. If you never saw The Treasure of the Sierra Madres, you won't get that one. Humphrey Bogart, and it was a pretty cool movie back when Humphrey Bogart was making movies. Okay, that was not really what Alfonso Bedoya said. Alfonso played the bandit. They called him Golden Hat. He said, "Badges? We ain't got no badges. We don't need no badges. I don't have to show you any stinking badges." That's what he actually said. In Blazing Saddles, somebody actually did say, "Badges? We don't need no stinking badges." But they were not the first. No, the first time anybody said, "Badges? We don't need no stinking badges," was Mickey Dolenz from the Monkees. Well, our class, instead of Border Patrol uniforms, we were issued OD green Army uniforms. 1 each. 1 pair of pants, 1 shirt, that had to last us the whole week. Try not to sweat too much. By Friday, the air around us was a bit thick. We were being followed by a small cloud of flies. Oh, well, maybe not, but it was getting a bit ripe. We were issued a huge box full of books. This actually scared some guys. They quit right after seeing that pile of books. They thought we would have to learn all of that. Well, most of it was just for reference. We hardly used any of those books. And so began Class 226-2 of the McClellan 500. Most Border Patrol classes are only 50 guys. We had 500, so we were divvied up into groups of 50. We spent way too much time in crowded locations. To make matters even less enjoyable, we had to eat Army food. We had to walk into the chow hall and give the head count the last 4 of our social insecurity numbers. You could tell who had not been to basic right away. They had to dig out their social security card so they could read off the number. The food was bad. Not much else to say about it. I lost weight not because I did a lot of PT. No, I lost weight because the food wasn't worth eating. They even screwed up the coffee. The coffee was so bad that I went to the PX and I bought a coffee maker, which I stuck in my wall locker. I put a coffee can next to it and I charged $0.25 per cup. Bring your own cup. After paying for the coffee, the maker, and all the accoutrements that went along with it, I made over $300 in quarters. I had to roll all those quarters and cash them in. Still, $300, that's not bad in 6 months. Some guys didn't pay for their coffees. Guys like Pookie. Yes, there was a guy called Pookie. He'd accidentally left a letter out from his girlfriend, and she called him that, so we did too. One thing you don't want to do in a large group of people, especially men, is let them know that there's something that irritates you, because that's what they will do from then on. There was a guy named Fred. Fred had some problems. He had been working at a substance abuse clinic before joining the patrol. He should have checked into the clinic instead. He would get up in the morning and down a big cup of booze just so he could get out of bed. He had alcohol hidden all over the place so he could have just a little, sometimes a big nip, before, during, and after class. Well, the smell kind of gave him away, and he wound up getting kicked out after a short time. Wonder whatever happened to that guy. Well, the food was bad. The weather was wet and cold. Our rooms were too full, and they turned the water heaters off to work on them in the middle of December. So we had to take cold showers every day. Such fun. We did get to shoot a lot. Every other day we rode a bus to the pistol range. We were issued a break front holster for a Ruger revolver. Then we were issued a Smith & Wesson pistol. The pistol doesn't fit in the holster, guys. We could get it in there, but then it was near impossible to draw the pistol and fire. To make things even more fun, since we were wearing Army uniforms, we didn't have keepers to keep the pistol belt in place. So when you tried to pull the pistol out of the holster, the whole thing would just slide around your waist. I had to hold the belt with one hand while drawing my weapon with the other. Well, shooting was easy. PT was easy. Law classes were easy. Spanish, well, that was horrible. There just weren't enough hours in a year to learn Spanish along with all the other things we had going on. I stayed up late at night, like 1 or 2 in the morning, trying to hablar Español. We had a saying, 71 and a gun. Just had to pass that last class, that last test, and you got to keep your job. Otherwise, you got to go home early. At Glencoe, they have Spanish classes. If you know Spanish, you could speak it. You went in class 1. If you kind of knew Spanish, not very well, but good enough, you went to class 2. If you had a working ability to speak Spanish, 3, maybe class 4. If you were having difficulty with Spanish, you would go to class 5. And if you didn't speak a word of Spanish, they put you in class 6. Well, at Anniston, we had 3 classes. You had the guys that could speak Spanish. You had the guys that could kind of speak Spanish. And then you had the rest of us. We were all in kindergarten. Our instructor spent most of his time making fun of us and complaining about how bad he had it. As if he was fighting, trying to keep his job. For 3 months, we had to put up with this guy who didn't much care if we survived or not. We had lots of names for him, none of which were very nice. Jerk was probably the nicest name we called him when he wasn't around. Then came the midterms, which I managed to fail. After the midterms, we were given a new Spanish instructor, Mr. Crow. He did his best to teach us how to speak Spanish. He went way beyond what was expected of him. Things like late-night classes and a few weekends as well. He told us his job was to teach us, and he did. There were many incidents that happened while at the academy that I won't mention. Things like the Youngblood incident. Boy, was that a nightmare. Not for me, but those unfortunate guys that got caught up in it. We lost about 45 guys to that incident over the Thanksgiving Day holiday. What a holiday that was. The class, right after ours, was canceled. There was going to be a second 500 at Fort McClellan, but they wound up going to Glencoe instead. I don't know if this was why, but the next day the fort gate just up the road from our barracks was closed. We had been walking up the road to a shopping center right across the road from the fort. There was a grocery store and a laundromat. They had movies and restaurants. Once that gate was closed, we had to take a cab or walk the 6 miles to the next gate. Yeah, we did have a laundry room near our barracks, but they had 20 washers hooked up to a 1/2-inch water pipe. It would take about 2 hours just to do the wash. That didn't include drying. Now, someone, who will remain unnamed, went to the PX with an ID card that showed his lower backside instead of his face. On the card it said his name was Mr. Butt. Because of this, we were no longer allowed in the PX. The guy was one of our instructors. He told me about it later on in my career. He even showed me the old ID he managed to hang on to. Well, the longer we were there, the worse things got. Had our class been a year instead of 6 months, I doubt any of us would have survived. A part of our training that has since been done away with was boxing. It was kind of fun and a great way to get some stress out. We had to beat the tar out of each other. There were some folks who had never fought a day in their lives. I was up against a guy named Alex Rodriguez. He was a bit smaller than I was, and I thought this was going to be easy. However, Alex knew how to fight. I kept my guard up, and he couldn't land a punch, but I couldn't see where he was. Whenever he was on the other side of the ring, I would lower my gloves so I could see him, and Alex would hit me right in the face. Either his arms were 8 feet long, or he was way too fast on his feet. I finally landed one really good punch on him, and his arms dropped to his sides, and he just stood there for a second. He then proceeded to break my nose. I did get even with him, though. He broke his hand on my face. Mongo. Mongo got his name from the movie Blazing Saddles. He looked kind of like Alex Karras, only a bit shorter. And he was scary tough. In baton training, when you had to go up against a guy with a knife, using a plastic baton, he just yelled at his opponent, and his opponent dropped the weapon without a fight. Well, Mongo was put up to box a guy named Gus. Gus had been a boxer in the Navy. He had punched so hard that the heavy bag had come right off of the chain. Gus came out swinging. He landed a couple of really good hits right on Mongo's head. Mongo just grunted and started to advance. Gus hit him a few more times, and Mongo just kept coming. You could see that Gus was now worried. He'd hit Mongo as hard as he could, and nothing happened. Mongo would advance and Gus would go on the defense. He was backing up and looking for an opening. Finally, one of the instructors got up close to Mongo and he looked him in the face. And then he called the fight. He said Mongo was unconscious, but he was still trying to get to Gus. We literally had to drag Mongo off of the ring. Then we had to keep an eye on him all night to make sure he didn't have a concussion. Like I said, the guy was scary tough. 6 months went by like a year and a half. One day, we were issued genuine Border Patrol uniforms and told it was looking like we just might make it. I received a size 8 hat. I normally wear a 7 1/4. The hat would sit down over my eyes and just kind of prop up on the end of my nose. Had to stuff a whole newspaper into the headband to keep the thing up high enough. A friend of mine, Glenn, had a pistol belt that was so big we wrapped it around him twice and buckled it. R&R Sales had shipped any old crap they had laying around the warehouse. Good time to get rid of some unsellable stuff, I guess. Because all of our holsters had been broken due to our having to jerk the pistol out over and over, the government was nice enough to allow us to purchase new ones. All they had on stock were dress holsters, and, well, we had to use them for rough duty. It didn't take us long to tear those up as well. They were not designed to be used under the conditions that we used them for, but I did get my badge. And on that happy note, I'm going to take a brief pause, play some commercials, and drink some coffee, so don't go away. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. Did you hear a bump in the night and you think it just might be a ghost? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. That's the LPRS for all your otherworldly needs. Coffee makes the world go round, and around here we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. If you're not looking for coffee, try their tea. It's the best in town. And remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. Did you go out UFO hunting and couldn't focus on the sky? Swing on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle Del Norte, right across from the Embassy Suites. That's not a weather balloon, that's a flying saucer. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to. And welcome back. We were given our orders to report to our duty stations. When we arrived at Laredo South, there were 38 of us in one class. There were only 20 journeymen at the station, and several of them were on detail. To take care of this, they would put 2 or 3 of us in a car or a van with one guy to teach us all the things we didn't learn at the academy. Things like how to actually speak Spanish. Oh, they taught us Spanish at the academy, all right. I had a 71 on my final. They taught us Castilian Spanish. That's what they speak in Spain, not in Mexico. Nope. Kind of like listening to somebody speaking Welsh. I would question the guy that I had caught, and he would turn to my journeyman and ask him what the heck I'd said. They taught us all kinds of words that nobody in Mexico knows. Thank God Danny Perales had asked the college to help out. Danny had asked for some Spanish tutors to help us out with speaking Spanish so that when we went to the 10-month, we just might pass. I wandered into the learning center late one afternoon. I asked for the Spanish tutor, and I was introduced to a young woman named Lourdes Hernandez. And she was kind of cute, and I hoped she could help me keep my job. 4 nights a week, 5 hours a night, I would show up and try to learn not just Spanish, but some basic English. I can speak English, but I was having a hard time with spelling. But that's another story. I worked my butt off. My Spanish tutor earned her keep. Once again, I managed to get a 71 on my final 10-month Spanish test. It probably helped a lot that the 2 agents on my test were a couple of white guys. One of them had been in the fire department as well. I would say something in Spanish like con que propósito entró usted a los Estados Unidos. And they would look at each other, they would kind of shrug their shoulders, and they'd both say, well, that sounded okay. Once I was off probation, I went back to the learning center to thank my tutor. I offered to take her to dinner. Well, I did take her to dinner, along with her mother, and her sister, and her other sister, and her other sister's boyfriend. I had no idea how things went down here. Eventually, we got married. She keeps me from doing anything too crazy, and Lulu bought all of the equipment that I use for doing this podcast. Once we were no longer probationary agents, they sent us out on our own. We were told to stay out of trouble and try to do our jobs the best we could. Since there were so many of us from the same class, we wound up working together a lot. Matt and I wound up together way too often. Why was this a problem? Because every time we were together, something would go really wrong. One night we'd been out down south, backing up special ops. It was already midnight, and we were cut loose to head home. As we're driving up 83, we came to a van that looked very much like a load vehicle. It had all the right markings, so we lit it up. The supervisor was listening as we pulled the vehicle over at 12:30. He was about to leave, but he stayed just to see what we had. The van was filled with men from China. 11 of them. A person from Mexico, if he wasn't wanted or a problem child, would be written up and then returned to Mexico in a few minutes. Anyone else took from 4 to 6 hours to write up. We call these folks OTMs, other than Mexican, and we had just caught 11 guys from China. We ran them through 940, their names, and then we stood there on the side of the highway waiting. The whole time, Jenkins is jumping up and down, wanting to leave but unable to in case we had a huge case to process. After waiting too long, we finally received word from 940 that each and every one of our catch had cards allowing them to be in the country. They'd all left them in their hotel rooms. Immediately after, our supervisor called and told us to leave the keys on the desk, and he got the heck out of there, afraid we might find something else. One evening, after working ourselves half to death, we stopped off at Danny's to have a glass of iced tea and relax just a little bit before heading to the office. We worked a 10-hour shift and tried not to catch anything too weird after midnight. Matt was going to take a slow roll through River Drive Mall parking lot and then head in. We got going as well, and as we were almost out of the downtown area, we heard Matt yell on the radio, "Shots fired, River Drive Mall," followed by nothing. Tires were a-squealing as we shot back across town heading for the mall. And people were trying to get Matt on the radio, but he wasn't answering. The midnight shift was coming on, and they were tying up the radio. We were all in a bit of a panic trying to get to the mall parking lot and see if Matt was still alive. There were a few one-way streets that were violated. Stop signs were only a decoration as we sped by. We came flying into the parking lot. We spotted his car sitting next to an 18-wheeler in what is known as the dirt parking lot. Matt was there with his pistol out looking for the shooter. His radio had accidentally gotten switched to a different channel right after he had made the call. The truck driver was dead. His partner was bleeding and would soon follow. There were shell casings all over the place. It turns out it was a dope deal that had gone bad, and the guy from across had used a MAC-10 to show his disapproval. A MAC-10 was a small handheld machine pistol, fired a .45 caliber bullet at a rate of fire of 1,090 rounds a minute. It had a 30-round magazine, so they ran out fast, but in close quarters they were very effective. The shooter was believed to be in the brush, so we had to go looking for him. We swept the brush along the riverbank. It was hot and humid. We were amped up with adrenaline. We spent about an hour searching along with the Laredo police. The shooter was probably back in Mexico before we got there, but we didn't know this until later on. On another occasion with Matt, I pitched a cigarette butt out the window of a new sedan. It went out the window, but it came back in, pushed by the wind. I'm driving along when we smell smoke. The back seat was on fire. I slammed on the brakes and we got the fire out. I had to dump my coffee on it. That is no way to end a shift. On another occasion, we were coming back from the checkpoint, driving along Highway 359. Both of us were asleep. Too bad I was driving. As the right side wheels left the pavement, we both woke up. Had the fence been a bit closer to the highway, I would have driven right through it. Fortunately, we stopped just as the front bumper hit that first strand of barbed wire. Nothing but a few scratches on the front bumper. Back during Desert Storm, everybody was on edge. The clerks at the Walmart called the Border Patrol when a group of foreign-looking people tried to steal a bunch of jewelry. They said that these people were speaking some kind of a weird language that nobody understood. When security were called, all the suspects had run for the parking lot. Well, Matt and I were at the checkpoint when we got word to be on the watch for odd behavior. 2 cars rolled up, both with Illinois license plates. Matt asked if the 2 cars were traveling together, to which they said no. Well, he immediately secondaried both cars, and we began to question the occupants. Both cars were rentals. The people in them all looked extremely suspicious. We took all 4 back to Laredo South for questioning. Once at the station, things went downhill fast. These people were rude to begin with. Then, they refused to answer simple questions like what their names were or where they were from. If we did get a name, it was quickly changed each time a question was asked. Well, a search of the people revealed as many as 5 driver's licenses with the same photo but different names. And they all smoked, one cigarette right after another. One of our senior agents, Nick, suddenly came to the realization that these folks were gypsies. They were talking amongst themselves in Serbo-Croatian, a language known only to them. They lied about everything, and I do mean everything. I would ask a guy where he was born, and he would say he was born in France. So then I had to ask him what country he was a citizen of, and he said Germany. So I asked him why, if he was born in France, was he a citizen of Germany, to which he said he was actually born in Belgium. And this went on and on. All they did all night was lie to us. We processed from midnight until 9 in the morning. By that time, we hadn't finished a single form, let alone file. Finally, the supervisor said to just ship everybody and all the paperwork to Port Isabel, which was a detention and processing center. The next day, we found out that the gypsies had all been released. In order to deport them, some country had to be willing to take them, but no country on earth wanted any more gypsies than they already had. All that work for nothing. It really makes you feel like you're doing a good job. Yep, every time me and Matt were together, we found a new and interesting way to screw things up. Remember I said something about OTMs? Late one night, a really good dope sensor was going off. It would hit 10 or 15 times and then stop. A short time later, it would start hitting again, so I went down to have a look. I was hoping to bag a nice big dope load. It was already almost 1 in the morning and our shift was about to start a pachanga, an after-work get-together. I was just going to nip down, catch the dope, and head back to the office. Well, that was the plan. As I walked into a clearing, I spotted some lumps in the grass right next to a big tree. This was where the dopers at some time left the load. As I got closer, I noticed one of the lumps was looking at me. It had a face. As I grew closer, I could see the lumps were all bodies. I was now hoping and praying they would be from Mexico. I got down close to one and I asked him, "Where y'all from?" To which he said the whole group was from El Salvador, and there were 22 of them. I called back to the station and I asked for some help transporting my load. It took all night to process the OTMs. I was about the least popular guy on the shift, up until some other guys screwed up, and this took the pressure off me finally. Well, that's nothing like what happened to the guys at the North Station. They'd started following a group through the Galvan Ranch, maybe 100 or more. The folks trying to avoid capture had some tricks they would use. I'm not going to give any details because there are still people trying to get by our agents. The giant group were on one of those huge ranches off Mines Road. The agents couldn't get ahead of them. Any time they thought they had them lined up, the group would turn. As the sun was going down, the North agents had to call it a night. The next morning, the North guys went out and tried to reacquire the group. They began to track them and soon found a dead body laying under a tree. It looked like he'd just given up due to a lack of water. We were right in the middle of a drought that year. They called the location into the county, and then they went about seeing to the rest of the group. If one guy had died, the others might be in need of help as well. It wasn't long before they found another body, followed by a few more. It was turning into quite a nasty mess. My shift came on for the evenings, and we listened to all the action as it played out over the radio. Late that night, One of the North agents said he'd spotted the group. All the guys involved began to converge on his location. Then we heard him say, "They're not from Mexico." This was followed by silence. I'll bet some of the guys up there were trying to figure out how they could slip away unnoticed and not have to process. By 11, the head count was at 120 OTMs, and they had guides in the group. The brother of the man in charge had died from dehydration, so he had forced the group to carry his body through the brush, not willing to abandon his own kin, even though he had left so many others behind. Somebody called an A-chief, and they asked for a decision to be made. And the decision was made. 40 OTMs were to be shipped to the South Station so we could share in the long, drawn-out processing ordeal. You see, back then we typed everything. Typewriters. Some were as old as I was. There was no copy machine, so we had to use carbon paper. The Form 221S had to be typed on both sides, and it had to be letter perfect. This was the form designed by some bureaucrat who hated life, and he wanted to share his hatred with all of us. This form was the cause of many screaming fits when the last letter was astray, and the whole thing had to be started all over. 40 OTMs meant about 200 man-hours of processing. Yeah, that's better than North, who had 80 OTMs and a smuggling case, but then North had well over twice as many agents as we did. Our supervisor began calling us all in to the station. We hung our heads with despair and began dragging ourselves back to the station. Those who smoked stopped at the store to buy extra cigarettes, knowing it was going to be a long night. Well, our supervisor was and always will be our hero. Not going to go into any of the details of why he was our hero, but this was the guy that if you got in trouble, you wanted to talk to him first. He was there to help you as long as you weren't some kind of an idiot. He really cared about the men under him. As we rolled into the station, he explained how it was going to go. He said it was going to take about an hour for the bus with the OTMs in order to get to us. It was already well after 11, and it would be a smart idea to be out of the station at midnight. Leave the processing to the midnight shift, as it were. Right at midnight, the gate to the parking lot looked like a drag race as vehicles went flying out the door so they could avoid this processing party that nobody wanted to be involved in. The midnight shift processed all night. Then the day shift had to process as well. By the time we came in at 4 o'clock for the evening shift, all the paperwork had been done, and all we had to do was transport the OTMs to wherever we could put them. Yep, our supervisor was, is, and always will be our hero. He was just one of those kind of guys. One evening, we caught a smuggling case, and we processed the principal. We were told to take him to the Webb County Detention Center out on San Ignacio Road. Loop 20 wasn't there yet, so we drove up McPherson to Del Mar. From Del Mar, we drove out of town to San Ignacio Road. That road was in really bad shape, and you had to drive real slow or wind up breaking an axle or something. The detention center had been built at an old Air Force radar station. The main gate was at the end of a real bad road. We pulled up to the gate, and it was open. There wasn't a guard in sight. Well, we looked around to see if maybe the prisoners had rioted and taken over. Our weapons were at hand, just in case. We carefully drove into the detention center and we stopped at the administration building. We got out, watching in every direction, leaving our prisoner locked in the vehicle. We made our way to the front door and swung it open real fast. In we went, looking for any signs of guards or prisoners holding guards hostage. There they were. 6 guards were sitting around a table playing cards. The guy with the brass on his lapels gave us a shocked look. Then he yelled at us, saying that we were not supposed to bring our weapons into the detention center. I had quickly looked around to be sure nothing was any more screwed up than what we'd already found, and then I asked him why was the front gate open. He looked at me. Then he looked at his men as if trying to see who he could blame things on. Then he realized that he was the one who had forgotten to close and lock the front gate. Now the guy in charge was all kinds of apologetic for yelling at us. He was sorry he'd yelled at us. He was sorry he'd told us not to have our weapons in the center. He even went so far as to take care of all the paperwork needed to put our prisoner in his charge. As we were leaving, I got the guy in charge over to the side, and I told him he really should try to do a better job, and he just might want to do a head count to make sure that none of the prisoners had wandered off in the middle of the night. Webb County decided to take prisoners from the Texas Department of Corrections, TDC. You know, real prisoners. Guys serving far more interesting sentences. Violent prisoners that required just a bit more security than the place they were being sent. Well, the TDC prisoners rioted and they finally burnt the detention center down. That'll show 'em. I've already talked about driving up in that group of Satanists in a different show. And I've talked about the mannequin that I put in that scarecrow unit. I talked about the ghost light that I'd seen on County Line. Back when I was young and full of energy, I really worked hard at my job. I did the best I could. Then time and injuries started to get to me. I threw my back out again, trying to rescue an alien dying from dehydration. I watched as agents that worked hard were passed over for promotion, while agents that should never have left the academy rose through the ranks. Our station went from 70 agents, 20 per shift, to well over 200 agents per shift. Changes were happening, but not all of them were for the better. Yeah, we got computers for processing, but the paperwork became more convoluted. We got new vehicles, but they were not nearly as reliable or indestructible as the old ones. Back in 1990, you couldn't kill a Ford Bronco. Yeah, they didn't have any air conditioning and they didn't have a good time radio, but those things were built to last. I was given a brand new Chevy Suburban that could get stuck in a 1-inch mud puddle. Well, I'm glad I'm retired now. I was tired when I worked for the government, and now I'm retired. It was a good job, and we had some fun doing it, but that was another time. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your friends to listen up. If you didn't enjoy it, well, nobody wants to hear that anyway. Till next time, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder 3? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?